And so there are a number of advantages to taking away, ceasing to promote that misperception that wars belong to presidents and making the war belong to Congress. And one is that you get a lot more activism right away. And in the long run, you don't leave this catastrophic position where the power to make war belongs with the president. Now, taking the power to make war away from presidents and the power to make laws away from presidents and all of these powers away from presidents is going to take a lot of work. But one step is to remember that Congress exists, that it's the first branch of our government, that it's Article 1 of the Constitution, that it's the first 60% of the Constitution, that the geniuses who wrote that thing specifically put the power to make war in a different place from where the commander-in-chief was.
Now, speaking of the Constitution, you've had some very interesting things to say about potentially amending the Constitution and what should be done in that regard. I would say maybe even some controversial statements about that. Could you speak to that? Very, very interesting comments. And also the free speech, the idea of maybe limiting free speech, which is sort of, we think is antithetical to the whole progressive agenda. But let's talk about that first. How would we limit free speech in order to help the peace movement?
Well, I think more than anything else, we need to expand free speech, and we need real freedom of the press. We need to break up this media cartel. We need public media, community media, nonprofit media. We need multiple outlets and should welcome media outlets that have points of view and outgrow this horrible, horrible, damaging misperception that you can have a media outlet without a point of view because it's the corporate point of view. I don't think we need more free speech cages, you know, a block away from a public event and so forth. We need to expand free speech and free press, but there are some ways in which I think it should be limited. I don't think we should have pundits on cable TV joking about assassinating people, encouraging violence, encouraging racial hatred. I think that there are potentially criminal avenues for pursuing some of that behavior. But I also think that much worse than that is promoting massive slaughter of human life on the basis of lies. And so I think that blatant war propaganda, knowingly pushing lies to promote a war, perhaps should be banned. I think it does more damage than shouting fire in a crowded theater. I think it clearly has done outrageous damage. We have at least 1.3 million bodies in Iraq and millions more lives destroyed and traumatized. And you know, the media outlets pushed lies, and they knew they were pushing lies. So there are, you know, there are some kinds of speech that I think we would be better off without. Not just because I disagree with it. There's lots of speech I disagree with, and I don't want it censored, and I don't want it balanced with a fairness doctrine, and I don't want it taken off the air. I want to counter it with more speech and better speech. You know, I don't want to be afraid of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed speaking in his trial and take away the right of future defendants to speak in their trial. If we're the society of free speech, let him say his crazy things and counter it with more and better speech. But when it comes to war lies, that's where I stop and wonder, you know. And in England, they're having a serious investigation of their part in the war lies. We're not even talking about it.
Right. I really appreciated that you referenced Vincent Bugliosi, who I had the honor to interview, and his dissatisfaction would be definitely not a strong enough word. Outrage, beyond outrage, that a piece of evidence like the white paper could be ignored and criminal prosecution really not seriously be considered. How is this not a step backwards to pursue criminal prosecution, and why is that so important, do you believe?
I think this is the most damaging thing we are doing right now, is creating a class of Americans above the law, the people who make the laws and are not subject to them, and the rest of us who have little to do with making the laws and have to obey them. So we have, in the course of 2007, 2008, dozens of people not comply with subpoenas. You and I do that, we go to jail. We have public confessions in the form of legal memos, blatantly legalizing not just torture, but aggressive war at the whim of any future president. The memo that Jay Bybee's name is at the bottom of, from October 23rd, 2002, legalizes illegal war at the whim of any president. There is no greater crime, and it's confessed to in a memo, and he's not behind bars, he's a judge. He's a judge to whose appeals court some of these other issues are being appealed. And the only reason that he's not behind bars is that he's in the above the law class of citizens.
Karl Rove, you know, why is he still walking around? He doesn't have to do anything about the subpoena?
He does not. Well, you know, the Congress has given up the power of subpoena. They issued dozens of subpoenas that were simply laughed at. They did not enforce them. No one knows that any congressional committee has the power to enforce its own subpoenas with the Capitol Police Force, as was done up till 75 years ago. There's no dispute that they have this power, but 75 years ago, they made a statutory crime of contempt and had the Justice Department enforce their subpoenas, and that worked up until they're subpoenaing members of the Justice Department, former employees of the Justice Department, members of the same crime family, and then they're told no. So they say, oh, well, we'll take you to court. That's a real branch of government. We don't mean any offense or assume any power, you know, as the Congress, but we'll take you to court. And eventually they get a ruling. But with the exception of Karl Rove, who testified not in public, not on camera, not under oath, and approved topics and so on, nobody else, to my knowledge, has complied with any of those subpoenas, and not a single one has been reissued. And in April of this year, these memos come out purporting to legalize torture with Jay Bybee's name at the bottom, and all the human rights groups that fled from impeaching Bush and Cheney just wanted to see every bit of damage done that could be done, and then started talking about prosecuting some people, which I applaud. And the corporate newspapers who cheered for everything. In April, the New York Times said, impeach Jay Bybee. All of these groups said, impeach Jay Bybee. The newspaper where he sits in court in Utah said, impeach Jay Bybee. Just widespread, no hesitation, no preliminary investigation, just there's nothing more obvious, impeach him. And Senator Leahy said to Mr. Bybee, would you mind coming in and talking to the United States Senate?
If you got the time.
If it's not a trouble, I know
Right.
you're in the West Coast, but you might have heard of us. We're down the street from the White House. And Jay Bybee told Senator Leahy to go Cheney himself. And, you know, I got to go golfing that day. And that was that. They have not subpoenaed a single person in the year 2009 because the Justice Department won't enforce them any more than the previous Justice Department. The Congress won't do anything that the President, the man who was supposed to execute the will of Congress, doesn't instruct them to do. So the power of subpoena is gone. The power of impeachment, incidentally, is gone too. We impeached a judge for groping female employees this year, right? Because you'll recall the Constitution says, the President, Vice President, any civil officer of the United States shall be removed from office on conviction, on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors if it involves sex and it's a Democrat, right? This is,
Hey, we did that, okay.
This is impeachment now.
Not
right?
illegal wars or torture or, you know,
Right.
wiretapping.
No, you can legalize torture, you can legalize aggressive war, but if you're a right-winger, and Fox News would disapprove, and if you're a former member of the executive branch of the royal throne, then you're off limits. And so Congress doesn't impeach, Congress doesn't subpoena, Congress doesn't have a voice because the other branches of government don't have to pay any attention to what Congress does. And Congress can pass good laws, nobody has to obey them.